The sea had long ago learned her name, though society spoke it only in whispers. Elowen Vale stood within the lantern chamber of the lighthouse, its glass panes rattling beneath a rising gale, and watched the tide coil itself around the black rocks like a serpent guarding secrets. Below her, the forbidden shore stretched in a crescent of shingle and sorrow, a place sailors crossed themselves before approaching and courtiers pretended did not exist. It was said that treachery had once been plotted upon these sands. It was said that the daughter of a traitor kept its solitary flame. She moved with quiet precision, trimming the wick, polishing the lens as though each ritual were a vow renewed. Her hands bore the fine tremor of one accustomed to scrutiny, yet her spine remained unbent. The world beyond the cliffs believed her diminished. She believed only in the necessity of light. When dusk gathered like bruised velvet across the horizon, she set the lamp aglow, and its beam cut through the oncoming storm with unwavering resolve. The sea answered with a roar. Earlier that afternoon, a carriage had dared the narrow road from the nearest harbor town, its wheels spitting gravel in petulant defiance of the wind. A small company of minor nobles had descended upon the shore, eager for diversion during their coastal retreat. They had summoned Elowen as one might summon an oddity from a cabinet of curiosities. She had gone because refusal would be interpreted as pride, and pride was a luxury denied to the disgraced. They received her beneath a striped pavilion flapping against its ropes, silver tea service trembling upon linen. Lady Marbridge, whose pearls were rumored to be more loyal than her friends, had surveyed Elowen's plain grey gown with unconcealed satisfaction. "Miss Vale," she had purred loud enough for every idle ear, "how dutiful of you to attend. We feared the sea had claimed you entirely." A ripple of laughter followed, brittle as broken shells. Elowen inclined her head. "The sea claims only what is careless, my lady. I endeavor not to be." The barb had landed, yet it altered nothing. They spoke of her father next, Captain Adrian Vale, once celebrated for valor, now memorialized in pamphlets as a conspirator who had betrayed shipping routes to foreign hands. No trial had redeemed him before fever carried him to the grave. His name lingered like smoke that refused to clear. Lady Marbridge lifted her cup. "It must be lonely, keeping watch where treason once breathed." "It is not treason that breathes there," Elowen replied, steady though her pulse beat wildly, "but wind and salt. They are less deceitful." The sky darkened in sympathy, clouds muscling across the sun. A young lord, flushed with wine, leaned close enough for her to catch the sourness on his breath. "Do you guard the shore?" he asked softly, "or does it guard you from decent company?" Before she could answer, a distant shout fractured the air. All heads turned toward the horizon, where the sea had begun to convulse in earnest. Through veils of rain, a royal standard flickered upon a vessel struggling against the current. Recognition rippled through the assembly like a dropped stone through still water. "It cannot be," someone murmured. But it was. The black and gold crest of the crown cut sharply against the storm, unmistakable even through sheets of rain. The vessel veered closer to the shoals than any captain with sense would dare. Panic overtook refinement. Ladies clutched skirts, gentlemen barked contradictory orders. "Signal them away," Lord Marbridge cried as though his voice could command wind. Elowen had already turned toward the lighthouse. Protocol dictated that she light the warning flare, that she caution any ship from approaching the cursed shallows. Yet the vessel did not retreat. Instead, a smaller boat was lowered with decisive speed. One figure descended into it. One pair of oars struck the water with solitary determination. Lightning unveiled him in brief, brutal clarity, broad-shouldered, dark-cloaked, unaccompanied. The king did not await escort. He carved his path through the surf alone. King Alaric Thorne was not a sovereign given to spectacle. Widowed these 3 years, hardened by border wars and court intrigues, he was called the sea wolf behind gloved hands. His decrees were swift, his temper controlled, his loyalties opaque. That he should approach the forbidden shore without guard or counsel was an act bordering on madness. Rain soaked Elowen's hair as she descended the lighthouse steps and crossed the rocks toward the waterline. The nobles watched from their pavilion, scandal already fermenting behind their eyes. If the king drowned, blame would seek the nearest exile. The rowboat ground against stone. Alaric rose before the tide could claim his balance. He moved with the contained power of a man accustomed to obedience from both armies and storms. When he stepped onto the shore, the wind seemed to recoil. Elowen stood her ground. She had imagined confronting rumor all her life. She had not imagined confronting a king. "Your Majesty," she said, bending in formal courtesy, though the gesture cost her pride in the presence of those who despised her. "Miss Vale," he answered, his voice carrying above the gale without strain. It was lower than she expected, edged not with cruelty but with deliberate calm. Rain traced the line of his jaw. He did not wipe it away. Behind her, Lady Marbridge had ventured closer, parasol sacrificed to the wind. "Sire," she called anxiously, "this shore is most unsuitable. We implore you to return to safer ground." Alaric's gaze did not leave Elowen. "I am precisely where I intend to be." The word struck like a bell tolling across the surf. Murmurs erupted. The king's eyes, dark as deep water, assessed the lighthouse rising behind her, then returned to her face as though measuring resolve rather than reputation. "You keep the light," he said. "I do, your majesty." "In all weather?" "In all weather." A silence unfurled between them, taut and charged. She sensed scrutiny, yes, but also something else, an appraisal not of disgrace but of endurance. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar at his temple, a pale testament to former battles. "Then you are acquainted with storms." "I am acquainted with surviving them," she replied before caution could restrain her. For the first time, something almost like approval flickered in his expression. Thunder cracked overhead, scattering the onlookers backward. The tide surged, licking at their boots. "My counsel advises distance from this place," Alaric said quietly, so that only she might hear. "They call it cursed." "And do you, sire?" He regarded the lighthouse beams slicing through darkness, then met her eyes with unsettling steadiness. "I call it necessary." The pavilion crowd had fallen into stunned hush, scandal crystallizing into certainty. A king did not brave forbidden waters for trivial curiosity. If he sought her, he sought trouble. The wind howled anew, flinging spray against them. Alaric gestured toward the tower. "May I see the light more closely, Miss Vale?" Every gaze burned into her back. To refuse would insult the crown. To accept would ignite every whisper she had endured since childhood. Yet the beam behind her flared bravely against the storm, indifferent to opinion. "You may, your majesty," she said at last, and turned toward the narrow path leading upward. He followed without hesitation, leaving the nobles gaping at the shoreline as the rain swallowed the imprint of his solitary oars. The ascent to the lighthouse was steep and narrow, the stones slick beneath the assault of rain, yet King Alaric climbed without complaint, his presence close behind Elowen like a second pulse. She was acutely aware of the impropriety, of the 100 watching eyes below that would soon convert this climb into currency for scandal, yet she did not falter. The door yielded beneath her hand, and together they entered the circular chamber where firelight wrestled gently with the storm's gloom. Within, the air carried the scent of oil, salt, and old paper. Maps were pinned with deliberate precision along the curved walls, annotated in a hand both disciplined and elegant. Alaric removed his gloves slowly, surveying the room not as a monarch inspecting a holding, but as a man seeking evidence of character. "You dwell here alone," he observed. "I do, your majesty." "And you are not afraid?" She adjusted the wick with careful fingers. "Fear is an indulgence. Light is an obligation." The statement lingered between them, unadorned and sincere. He regarded her as though she had offered something rare. From within his cloak, he withdrew a small object wrapped in dark velvet. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, almost ceremonial. "Then perhaps," he said quietly, "this belongs once more in steady hands." He placed the parcel upon the wooden table. Elowen's breath tightened as she unfolded the cloth. Resting within lay a brass compass, its casing polished to muted brilliance, its glass unmarred. The initials AV were etched along the rim. Her father's compass. The room seemed to tilt, not from the wind but from memory. She saw again her father's broad hands guiding hers across maps, teaching her the language of currents and constellations. She had believed the compass lost with him, confiscated when accusations swallowed his name. "Where?" Her voice betrayed her, and she steadied it with effort. "Where did your majesty obtain this?" "It was held among effects seized during the inquiry," Alaric replied. "I ordered the records reopened." The confession carried weight. Records were not reopened lightly, reputations were not reconsidered without risk. "Why?" she asked, unable to mask the tremor of hope and dread entwined within her. "Because rumor is a coward's weapon," he said. "And I have little patience for cowardice." Outside, thunder rolled like distant artillery. Elowen's fingers traced the familiar curve of brass. The compass needle quivered, then steadied, obedient to unseen forces. "You risk much by entering this place," she murmured. "It is not only wind that seeks to unseat you." His gaze sharpened. "You speak of court. I speak of those who profit from disgrace, she answered. My father's name is convenient soil for many ambitions. A faint, grim acknowledgement crossed his face. Indeed. Silence settled, heavy yet not hostile. He moved closer to the lantern, examining the intricate lenses that magnified its glow. You have kept this light through seasons of neglect, he said. Why? Because ships do not consult scandal before they founder, she replied. Something in him shifted then, subtle yet undeniable. The rigid monarch receded, revealing a man who recognized devotion to duty. Miss Vale, he said, lowering his voice, your father's case was concluded in haste. Documents were misfiled, testimonies incomplete. I have reason to suspect manipulation. The word hung like a drawn blade. Manipulation implied conspiracy. Conspiracy implied enemies near the throne. If that is so, she said carefully, truth will not be welcomed. Truth rarely is, he answered. Yet it persists. Below, the storm intensified, and with it the whispering future. Elowen imagined Lady Marbridge's lips already shaping outrage, imagined sealed letters dispatched before dawn. A king climbing a disgraced woman's tower was narrative enough. A king returning her father's compass was rebellion. You should leave before the tide worsens, she said, though the words cost her. And abandon an unfinished conversation? His tone held a trace of iron. I think not. A knock sounded against the lower door, hurried, insistent. Elowen stiffened. Few approached unbidden. She descended partway to find one of the harbor stewards, hat clutched nervously. Beg pardon, miss, he stammered, glancing upward where the king's silhouette lingered, but a rider has come from the capital. A message marked urgent. Alaric accepted the sealed parchment without comment. The wax bore the crest of the Dowager Queen. He broke it with a decisive thumb, eyes scanning swiftly. Whatever he read did not soften his expression. They advise me, he said at last, voice cool as steel, to withdraw immediately from improper association. They warn of public unrest should I persist. Elowen felt the familiar ache of inevitability press against her ribs. Then you must heed them. He folded the letter once, precisely. I must consider them, he corrected. The distinction was dangerous. He stepped nearer, the narrowness of the stair forcing proximity. Miss Vale, I do not offer charity. I offer acknowledgement. There is a difference. Her throat tightened. And what acknowledgement is that, sire? That injustice has been done, he said, and that I intend to rectify it. The vow was quiet, yet it reverberated with consequence. Rectification would demand exposure. Exposure would ignite opposition. She understood suddenly that his presence was not impulse but declaration. You will be opposed, she warned. I am accustomed to opposition. But not of this kind, she insisted. This is quieter. It corrodes. His eyes held hers, unflinching. Then I shall endure corrosion. The audacity of it struck her breathless. Outside, the wind battered the glass as though protesting alliance. He turned toward the door at last, drawing his cloak about him. Keep the compass, he said. It points true. And if the needle is disturbed, she asked softly, then we steady it. He descended into the storm with the same solitary resolve that had carried him ashore. From the lantern chamber, Elowen watched as he returned to the waiting boat, refusing escort despite the frantic gestures of courtiers below. When he reached the vessel, he paused only once to glance back. The lighthouse beam caught him in pale radiance, isolating him against the dark expanse. By dawn, scandal would outrun the tide. Accusations would sharpen, alliances would fracture, and her name would be threaded through every drawing room in the kingdom. Yet as she closed her fingers around her father's compass, feeling its steady orientation despite the tempest, she sensed a tremor of change more potent than gossip. Far below, the royal barge signaled departure, its banners snapping defiantly in the gale. Elowen lifted the lantern's flame higher, unaware that in the capital, ink was already drying upon a decree that would test whether truth or reputation commanded the throne. The decree arrived at dusk, borne not by ceremony but by a single mounted courier whose horse trembled from hard riding. Elowen saw the rider from the lantern chamber and felt the fragile equilibrium of the past day's fracture within her chest. The sea lay momentarily subdued, its surface stretched taut beneath a sky the color of tarnished silver, as though even the horizon waited for the contents of that sealed dispatch. She descended to meet the courier at the base of the tower. He dismounted without flourish, offering a stiff bow that stopped short of respect. By order of the crown, he recited, though his eyes betrayed curiosity rather than loyalty. The parchment bore the royal seal, yet the wax was impressed with a secondary mark, the sigil of the Dowager Queen. Elowen broke it with steady fingers. The words were concise, merciless in their restraint. Pending further review of Captain Adrian Vale's conviction, custodianship of the Forbidden Shore Lighthouse would be transferred to the Admiralty. Miss Elowen Vale was instructed to vacate the premises within 7 days. For a moment she felt neither anger nor despair, only an extraordinary stillness, as though her body refused the blow by suspending sensation. The lighthouse had been her exile, yes, but also her inheritance of purpose. To strip it from her was to render her father's memory untethered once more. "I am to leave?" she asked quietly, though the decree required no clarification. The courier shifted. "Those are the orders, miss." She inclined her head, dismissing him with more dignity than he had granted her. When the sound of hooves faded, the silence pressed inward, thick and suffocating. 7 days. Court had answered the king's defiance not with direct confrontation, but with removal. If she were no longer keeper of the light, then his visits would lose their pretext. Scandal would dissolve into inconvenience. That night, the wind rose again as though summoned by injustice. Elowen lit the lamp with hands that did not tremble, though her heart did. She would not permit the flame to falter while it remained hers to tend. Yet as darkness deepened, another sound joined the restless sea, the steady, unmistakable rhythm of oars. She closed her eyes briefly before descending. He would come. Of course he would. Alaric stepped from the boat without ceremony, his cloak unadorned, his expression carved from controlled fury. There were no banners this time, no distant cluster of curious nobility. Only the raw exchange of wind and salt and unspoken challenge. "You have received it," he said. "I have." "And you intend to comply?" Her answer formed slowly. "I have always complied, Your Majesty." Compliance is the virtue expected of those under suspicion. His jaw tightened. "This is not justice." "No," she agreed softly. "It is strategy." They stood at the threshold of the tower, the lamp's glow spilling faintly behind her. The sea hurled spray against stone, impatient witness to their impasse. "I underestimated their haste," he said, voice low. "The Dowager moves swiftly when threatened." "And she is threatened by truth," Elowen replied. "If my father is absolved, those who accused him must answer." He studied her face as though searching for resentment. "You speak of your father's vindication as though it were secondary." She met his gaze. "It is not secondary. It is everything. But I will not be the instrument by which you fracture your throne." A flicker of something unguarded crossed his features. Admiration, perhaps, or frustration. "You presume I am so fragile." "I presume you are bound," she corrected. "As I am." They ascended together, the narrow staircase forcing proximity neither could entirely ignore. In the lantern chamber, the compass rested upon the table where she had left it, needle steady despite the turbulence outside. Alaric's eyes fell upon it. "I have found additional testimony," he said. "A junior officer who recanted privately before his death. He claimed the shipping routes were altered by another hand, not your father's." Hope flared painfully bright. "Then present it." "I shall," he answered, "but doing so will ignite inquiry into members of my own council." "And you hesitate?" "I calculate," he replied. She absorbed the distinction. Calculation was survival at court, hesitation was surrender. "Then calculate swiftly," she urged, emotion threading through composure. "For once I leave this place, they will claim it as admission of guilt renewed." He moved closer, close enough that the heat of him disturbed the cool air. "You would surrender your post to protect me." "I would surrender it to protect truth," she said, though her pulse betrayed the partial lie. Thunder fractured the sky, and for a suspended instant the chamber was bathed in blinding light. In that stark illumination, his restraint faltered. "Miss Vale," he said, her name no longer formal but urgent, "do you imagine I came to you for convenience?" She felt the question strike somewhere perilously tender. "Why did you come?" she asked. "Because I saw you stand against the sea months ago when a merchant vessel struck the shoals," he said. "You waded into surf others feared, securing rope with bleeding hands while men twice your size faltered. I asked then who you were. They told me you were the traitor's daughter. I did not believe the word traitor belonged beside such courage." The confession altered the air between them, thinning it, sharpening it. She remembered that night, remembered not noticing the distant silhouette upon the cliffs. "Pity is a dangerous foundation," she murmured. "Do I appear to pity you?" His tone was quiet, but iron lay beneath it. "No," she admitted. Silence stretched, charged not with hostility but with something far more volatile. The storm battered the glass. The light revolved faithfully, indifferent to human upheaval. "If you leave," he said at last, "the Admiralty will install a man loyal to the Dowager. He will keep the lamp lit, but he will not keep the truth." "And if I stay in defiance of decree?" she asked. "Then they will accuse you of sedition." A bitter smile touched her lips. "They have accused my family of worse." He reached toward the compass, his fingers brushing hers as he steadied it against the table's tremor. The contact was brief, accidental perhaps, yet it reverberated through her with startling force. "I will not permit them to erase you," he said. "Erase?" she echoed. "From this shore. From history." Her breath caught. The lighthouse beam swept across the sea again, illuminating the restless water in wide arcs of gold. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between his promise and her fear. Below, faint but unmistakable, another sound intruded upon the night. The crunch of boots upon gravel, more than one pair, approaching with deliberate pace. Elowen's gaze shifted toward the dark beyond the window, where shadows gathered at the base of the tower. She understood at once that the decree had not been the final move. "They do not trust distance to accomplish what intimidation may hasten," she whispered. Alaric turned toward the stair, every line of him sharpened by resolve. The conflict they had circled now stood at the threshold, no longer confined to parchment and rumor but ascending, step by deliberate step, toward the light. The knock that followed was not courteous but commanding, the heavy but of authority striking wood as though the door were already forfeit. Elowen felt the vibration travel through the stone beneath her feet, yet she did not retreat. Alaric descended first, each step measured, the controlled force of him unmistakable even in shadow. When he opened the door, wind rushed inward along with 3 uniformed officers bearing the Admiralty crest. Their leader removed his hat with rigid precision. "Your Majesty," he began, clearly unprepared for the sovereign's presence, "we were dispatched to secure the lighthouse in accordance with the Dowager's decree." "Secure," Alaric repeated evenly, though the word sharpened in his mouth. "From whom?" The officer's gaze flickered toward Elowen before returning hastily to the floor. "From improper stewardship, sire." Elowen stepped forward before silence could become concession. "Improper?" she asked, her voice calm though her pulse surged. "The light has not failed a single vessel in 5 years." "That is not the question, miss," the officer replied, recovering some composure. "The question is legitimacy." "Legitimacy," Alaric said, descending the final step so that he stood level with them, "is determined by truth, not by convenience." The wind howled as if echoing his rebuke. The officers shifted uneasily. They had expected to intimidate a solitary woman, not confront a king whose temper was legend. Yet the tension was not merely physical, it coiled through unseen corridors toward the capital itself. "The decree bears the crown's seal," the officer insisted, producing the parchment as though it were shield enough. "We are obligated to enforce it." Alaric accepted the document, scanning it once more. "And you imagine," he said softly, "that the crown is a monolith unaltered by those who whisper near it?" The implication hung heavily. Elowen saw understanding dawn in the officer's eyes. The sovereign's presence here was no rumor but defiance. "Sire," he ventured, lowering his voice, "the Dowager believes this association endangers the throne." "Association," Alaric echoed, turning the word as one might examine a flawed coin. "Is that what you believe?" The officer hesitated. It was the hesitation of a man caught between obedience and conscience. "I believe," he said carefully, "that scandal weakens authority." Elowen felt the sting of that truth. Scandal was already a tide surging beyond control, reshaping narratives and drawing rooms far from this wind-lashed shore. She met Alaric's gaze and saw calculation, but also something fiercer, resolve no longer tempered by caution. "You will inform the Dowager," he said, folding the decree with deliberate precision, "that I have countermanded this order pending formal review." The officer's breath caught. "Sire, with respect, such action will require public declaration." "Then prepare for one." The words fell like the striking of flint. There would be no quiet retreat, no subtle compromise. The conflict that had simmered in correspondence would now blaze before court and country alike. The officers withdrew at last, not in triumph but in wary retreat, boots crunching against gravel as they descended toward their waiting horses. The door closed against the gale, and silence reclaimed the tower, though it was a charged and volatile silence. Elowen turned toward him, understanding the magnitude of what had just occurred. "You escalate this beyond recovery," she said, not in reproach but in awe. Recovery implies regret, he answered. And do you not regret? His gaze softened fractionally. Only the years in which injustice stood unchallenged. The admission struck her more deeply than any proclamation. Yet beneath admiration lay fear. They will demand explanation, she said. They will force you to justify not merely my father's case, but your interest in me. I will justify both. Her breath faltered. Before the entire court? Before the entire kingdom, if required. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt, only consequence. Outside, lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the restless sea. Elowen felt the axis of her life shifting irrevocably. If you stand for me publicly, she said slowly, they will interpret it as more than justice. And if I do not, he countered, they will interpret it as weakness. The choice was not between scandal and safety, but between integrity and erosion. She understood then that he had already chosen his battlefield. He ascended once more to the lantern chamber, and she followed, the spiral staircase echoing their synchronized steps. At the top, the beam revolved faithfully, indifferent to human ambition. Alaric stood before the glass, watching its arc sweep across black water. I have commanded armies, he said quietly. I have quelled rebellion and negotiated fragile peace. Yet I find that confronting whispers requires greater courage. Whispers seldom bleed, she replied, but they poison. He turned to her fully then, the storm's reflection flickering in his eyes. Miss Vale, when I first reopened your father's case, I did so as king. Tonight I act also as a man. The distinction trembled between them. She felt the air thin, charged with unspoken acknowledgement. A man, she echoed carefully, must consider his heart as well as his throne. And if the two converge? Her composure wavered. Then both are endangered. He stepped closer, not touching, yet near enough that she felt the warmth of him through layers of propriety. You have borne exile with dignity, he said. You have guarded a light that others sought to extinguish. I will not permit your name to remain synonymous with disgrace. Names are fragile, she murmured. Only if unspoken, he replied. The lighthouse shuddered under a particularly violent gust, and instinctively she reached for the railing. His hand caught hers to steady her, firm and unyielding. The contact lingered an instant too long to be accidental. She felt the tremor not of fear but of recognition. Below, far along the shoreline, torches flared, more riders approaching, their flames small yet ominous against the dark. News traveled swiftly, confrontation had summoned spectators. The court would not allow this rebellion to remain private. Alaric released her hand, but the imprint of his touch remained. They gather, he said, observing the distant lights. By morning, the matter will be irrevocable. Then so shall we, she answered, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. He studied her as though reassessing not her vulnerability but her strength. When I stand before them, he said, I will clear your father's name. And mine? He did not hesitate. Yours I will claim. The word struck with the force of both promise and peril. Claim implied declaration, and declaration would ignite every corridor of power within the capital. Yet beneath the looming storm of politics, another storm gathered, quieter, fiercer, rooted not in ambition but in devotion. The torches below multiplied, their glow climbing the path toward the tower. Elowen felt no retreat within her now, only the fierce clarity of standing beside him at the precipice of consequence. The light continued its vigilant sweep, cutting through darkness as it always had. By dawn, whispers would become accusation, accusation would demand spectacle, and spectacle would require courage beyond calculation. As the first of the approaching riders dismounted at the base of the lighthouse, Alaric stepped toward the stair, his expression no longer guarded but resolute. Let them witness, he said. And with that, he descended to meet the reckoning he himself had summoned. Dawn broke not gently but with a stark, colorless light that exposed every gathered figure upon the shore. The riders who had ascended in the night now stood assembled in rigid formation, their cloaks snapping in the lingering wind, their expressions sharpened by anticipation. At their center waited the Dowager Queen's personal envoy, a man whose loyalty was reputed to be as immovable as the cliffs themselves. The sea lay unsettled but no longer violent, as though it too wished to witness what judgment would unfold. Alaric emerged from the lighthouse first, descending the final steps with unhurried authority. He wore no crown, yet command radiated from him with unmistakable force. Elowen followed a pace behind, not hidden, not presented as spectacle, but standing in quiet alignment. The murmurs that rippled through the gathered men were restrained, yet charged with curiosity and disbelief. "Sire," the envoy began, bowing with practiced precision, "the Dowager requests immediate clarification of your countermand. The court convenes within hours." "Then the court shall receive clarity," Alaric replied. His voice carried across stone and surf without strain. "You will accompany us back to the capital." A flicker of surprise disturbed the envoy's composure. "Us, your majesty?" Alaric did not look at Elowen when he answered. "Miss Vale will attend." The words were simple, yet their implication reverberated like cannon fire. To bring her to court was to shift the conflict from whispered rumor to public reckoning. Elowen felt the weight of every gaze, yet she neither lowered her head nor sought reassurance. If exile had been her crucible, then this was its unveiling. The journey inland was swift and silent, tension riding beside them like an uninvited passenger. When at last the palace gates rose into view, their ironwork severe against the pale sky, Elowen sensed the narrowing of her world into a single corridor of consequence. Servants paused mid-step as they entered. Courtiers halted conversations that would later resume with redoubled fervor. The great hall was already crowded. Chandeliers glittered overhead, scattering fractured light across polished marble. At the far end stood the Dowager Queen, draped in black silk, her composure immaculate and cold. Around her gathered counselors whose reputations had long shaped policy and perception alike. Alaric advanced without hesitation. "You requested clarification," he said, voice resonant within the vaulted chamber. "You shall have it." The dowager's gaze shifted to Elowen with measured disdain. "This woman's presence is the matter requiring explanation." "She is not a matter," Alaric replied evenly. "She is the daughter of a man wrongfully condemned." A murmur surged, then faltered as he raised a single hand. From within his coat, he withdrew a folio bound in dark leather. "Here are sworn statements, sealed and corroborated, attesting that Captain Adrian Vale altered no routes and betrayed no fleet. The accusations were engineered by those seeking leverage within this very council." Silence descended like a blade. One counselor paled visibly, another's fingers tightened upon his cane. The dowager's expression did not fracture, yet her eyes hardened. "You endanger stability for sentiment," she said. "I restore stability through truth," he countered. Elowen stood motionless, absorbing the magnitude of what unfolded. Her father's name, once spoken only in shame, now echoed in the heart of power. The envoy stepped forward, examining the documents with reluctant acknowledgement. "These testimonies bear authenticity," he admitted. "Then the record shall be amended," Alaric declared. "Effective immediately, Captain Vale is absolved." The words struck Elowen with unexpected force. For years she had braced herself against insult. She had not prepared for vindication. Her breath caught, yet she remained steady, unwilling to let emotion be mistaken for fragility. The dowager's voice cut through the chamber. "And what of propriety, Alaric? Will you amend that as well? Or does justice now demand that a king consort with scandal?" Every eye shifted between them. This was the fulcrum upon which dignity and desire balanced precariously. Alaric did not retreat from the scrutiny. Instead, he turned fully toward Elowen, his expression unguarded for the first time since entering the hall. "Propriety," he said slowly, "exists to safeguard honor. It is not a weapon to perpetuate falsehood." He crossed the remaining distance between them, the deliberate cadence of his steps echoing like a drumbeat. When he stopped before her, the hall seemed to contract, breath held in collective suspense. "Miss Elowen Vale," he said, his voice softened yet unmistakably resolute, "you have kept light where others sowed darkness. You have endured disgrace without surrendering integrity. Before this court and this kingdom, I acknowledge not only your father's honor restored, but your own unassailable dignity." The dowager inhaled sharply, but he continued before objection could take root. "I will not permit whispers to define what courage has already proven. If scandal arises from truth, then let scandal burn." A tremor passed through the assembly, shock, admiration, outrage intertwined. Elowen felt the full gravity of his words. This was no measured calculation but declaration. Yet she understood that his risk was not solely political. It was personal. "My sovereign," she said quietly, ensuring her voice carried, "I sought only justice for my father. I did not seek to divide your court." "You have divided nothing," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "You have revealed it." The counselor who had paled now stepped forward, desperation cracking his composure. "This is reckless," he protested. "You endanger alliances." "I endanger corruption," Alaric interrupted. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices until he raised his hand once more, commanding silence through sheer force of will. Then, in a gesture neither rehearsed nor restrained, he removed the signet ring from his finger, the emblem of sovereign authority, and held it where all could see. Gasps rippled outward. "This ring symbolizes the trust of a kingdom," he said. "Trust is not preserved through cowardice." He turned, and instead of reclaiming his throne's elevated platform, he placed the ring into Elowen's open palm. "I entrust my name to one who has guarded hers through fire." The hall seemed to tilt upon that single act. It was not a proposal shaped by romance alone, nor a theatrical rebellion, but an irrevocable alignment. Elowen felt the cool weight of gold settle against her skin, heavier than any jewel she had imagined. For a suspended heartbeat, the future balanced upon her response. She could return the ring, retreat into restored obscurity, preserve his crown from fracture. Or she could accept not merely his gesture, but the shared burden it entailed. Her fingers closed slowly around the signet. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, not as ornament but as equal in vigilance. A hush followed, profound and electrified. The dowager's authority faltered beneath the undeniable spectacle of sovereign choice. Outside, beyond marble and murmurs, the first true sunlight pierced the clouds, spilling gold across palace windows. The conflict that had begun upon a forbidden shore had reached its summit within the heart of power itself. As Alaric reclaimed his place beside her, not above, not ahead, but beside, the court understood that the lighthouse keeper had not been summoned to kneel. She had been summoned to stand.